everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Denis Lafontaine. I'm the coordinator of the English department. I would like to welcome you to the memorial ceremony that my department has organized in order to honor and celebrate the life of our late colleague and friend, Brian Llewellyn-ap-Dafydd. We chose a Wednesday to celebrate Brian because of UB, Universal Break, since it would allow for as many people at Vanier to attend. We know UB is a short time, and we only have a limited amount of time for speakers. However, our intention is to basically have the first hour for listed speakers, and then have the half hour at the end for open mic, so that anybody who's here who would like to speak can actually speak. A reception with light refreshments will follow, and those who do not get a chance to speak during the open mic session are encouraged to write down their memories of Brian, because we will be collecting these notes and eventually creating a book of remembrances that will be printed, bound, and made available to the Vanier community. Before we begin what I'm sure will be a very touching and emotional ceremony, I would like to thank the many people who have made this event possible. And I have a few people, so please be patient with me. Thank you to the music department, more specifically to Glenn Itzke and Wynne Richardson for providing this very fitting space for the memorial. This is the choir room, where Brian spent much joyful time, as you all know. Thank you to Heather House excuse me, and her chamber music ensemble, which is made up of very talented Vanier students, for volunteering to play a lovely musical piece to start the ceremony. Thank you to the Faculty of Science and General Studies Office for their support, as well as to Nora Sukiasian and Janelle Villanueva. Thank you to Denis Lafontaine, who is helping us record the remembrances, and for creating a webpage of memories and pictures of Brian. Thank you as well to David Scott and Jason for setting up the AV equipment needed today. Thank you to Sasha Matthew from the Black Watch Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, who will be playing the bagpipes at the end of the ceremony. And finally, thank you to all of my colleagues in the English department who have made this event possible by volunteering to organize the event, to take pictures, to act as ushers, and to be listed as speakers today. There are too many to mention individually by name, but I thank them all, especially Stephen Dinsmore, whose dedication and great planning skills are much appreciated. So thank you, Stephen. It has been a very emotional and difficult time for everyone in my department, and we are extremely grateful to have the support of so many colleagues and friends in other departments and throughout the college. Thank you to all of you for attending. It means a lot to us to see such a huge turnout. It is a testament to how friendly and collegial Brian was, and how much everyone at Vanier loved him. Joanne, Brian's wife, is here with us today, and we thank her for being here. We hope this short ceremony, Joanne, succeeds in showing you a fraction of how much Brian will be missed. You will notice that we have a few items in the back of the room in order to honor and remember Brian. You will notice one item in particular, his gown, his scholar's gown. We thought it would be appropriate to have these items with us today to remember him. And because I'm sure one of our many collective memories is of Brian walking down the hallways of Vanier with his robe on, billowing in the wind. So we had to have this object here today. I also wanted to let you know that we will be keeping a chair empty in the boardroom, draped with Brian's robe, for all 4 of our department meetings this semester as a way to honor Brian and remember him. I will now ask you to please turn off your electronic devices and put them away for the duration of the ceremony. We have a few people designated to take pictures during the ceremony, and Denis Lafontaine is basically filming the event and will post the video on the webpage he has created, so there's no need for electronic devices. And at this point, I'd like to ask you to help me to welcome Heather House and her chamber music ensemble, who will start the memorial ceremony with a musical piece by Antonin Dvorak entitled Slavonic Dances No. 10 and No. 2, as arranged by Terry Kenny. Thank you.
again. Many thanks to and The music department has been wonderful, especially Glenn Etier and Philippe Bourque, as well as Heather House, for so kindly participating in this memorial for our colleague, Brian. He spent many happy hours in this room singing his heart out. I'm Stephen Dinsmore from the English department, and I wanted to say a word about the recorded music as well. You've heard a little bit, and we'll hear some later. If you're able to stay for the reception, which will be, can be extended into the afternoon, the music department has been very generous to free up this room for us. We asked Brian's longtime friend, David Hart. You'll see a picture of him next to Brian in one of the photos on the reel. He was here from England for the funeral, and we asked him if he had any suggestions for music for this memorial. And he said that Brian had once appreciated a New Orleans type of shape to a ceremony, where going up the hill to the ceremony or to the funeral would be the dirge music, the contemplative, sad music, but coming back down was on the way to the party. And celebrating the life of the person they'd lost. So if you hear on the playlist some Schubert, a Welsh choir, bagpipes, followed by David Bowie and maybe some Captain Beefheart, and maybe even a song later on featuring a solo by an electric trouser press. That's kind of a long story, but maybe you'll hear it in the reception. We hope that this eclectic mix fits the spirit of the man who it honors. Incidentally, as some of you know, Brian wrote his MA thesis on the lyrics of David Bowie. The huge challenge we've had in putting all of this together is the number of people who've said they want to speak in a short time. So I'm speaking slowly, but I'm trying to hurry myself as well. My own brief eulogy was really threatening to become a kind of MA thesis. But so sadly, we've had to ask people to trim back their talks. But as compensation, we're encouraging everybody to still share their memories. Many of you have these memory sheets, which are available over at the guest book table. You'll have a chance there to sign the guest book and make a few comments. And just fold these pages in half and drop them into internal mail. And they'll be collected, some online maybe, and some into a book that we're hoping to put together. Kathy Collin is in the English department is hoping to gather these together in a book that could be available to be ordered online. And there are instructions on that page. We'll be hearing memories from Maggie McDonnell, Angelica Messer-Lemieux, Eric Durling, Aaron McLeod, Kevin Bushell, Patty Kingsmill, Anthony Granado, maybe Susanna Moreno, and Ron Pinet. It's a fairly long list for a short time, so if it spills over into an open mic time, which we'll have after a bagpiper plays, hopefully still people will be able to stay around and hear the rest. So I hope we will have time for an open mic period, and you'll just be welcome to come up to the mic and speak briefly. As we know, Brian loved parties as much as stories, and to paraphrase his friend David, his own were seldom brief. But speaking of Brian now, suddenly in the past tense, seems an incomprehensible grammatical error. And I half expect him to burst in these doors right now and set everything right, the way he did so many things these past half dozen years that Anthony and I were fortunate enough to share an office with his coffee maker because it no longer fit in his. The knuckle rap on the door, the key in the knob before we could reach it, the cheering, "Good morning, chaps." And as he filled his mug, his sly frown would show that today's lesson was brewing equal parts entertainment and rant. What is, he squinted sideways, switched his academic gown aside, and sat in our rickety student chair the way I imagine Dylan Thomas or Ben Jonson holding court in a pub, the Whale Road, quizzing us completely out of the blue. Or without introduction, he might read to us fully half of Bambara's short story, The Lesson, in a young Harlem girl's florid falsetto dialect. Or else Jim Hall's Maybe That's Your Problem Too, gesturing like a delusional Spider-Man. After the spontaneous pantomimes and tutorials, he'd stand briskly, "Mustn't keep you, good day, gents." And soon he'd be loading his dolly with boxes of what, I don't know. and breezing through 2 or 3 more conversations with a student, a colleague, and a custodian on his way to the elevator. He treated all us co-workers as extended family. The last time I saw him, he was writing those probably hundreds of sweet, quaint Christmas cards deep in his crowded museum that doubled as his office, and was looking forward to his recovery and his next classes. Always looking forward. Yet at the same time, always telling the old tales of his rugby and rock climbing days, his choirs and his classrooms, his ancient and postmodern heroes. Several weeks ago, before I substituted in his class on Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, he acted out an entire crash course, including a lesson on how to pull a very real, very heavy sword from its scabbard with the most intimidating schlink and brandish it around as I recited King Arthur's challenges. I pictured my own green head rolling on the dean's office. Once he told about a time way back when he was a student in England, young and easy, how every day for maybe 5 weeks, he drove to the foot of a sheer cliff and attempted to climb it freestyle. Day after day, he fell back to the sand on the 3rd step, but his determination grew to an obsession, and he understood that the challenge was in his mind. At this point in his story, he started to climb our office wall, literally. And I feared for him as he wedged the toe of his dress shoe onto a closet door hinge and gripped the thin molding with his fingernails and then swung the other foot onto a nail that broke off in a puff of plaster. And then as he tried to steady his big spidery weight against a thumbtack, red-faced and panting, almost triumphant now, he narrated how on that very last day, long ago in his youth, just as he was about to throw in the towel, a long invisible fissure opened to him suddenly like a lightning bolt in the rock, an epiphany, and he ascended it as in a dream, as if he'd finally found his place in this story he'd been struggling so long to tell. And then all at once, "G'day fellows, must be off." His life seemed an epic of these stories, many of which are now stored within the memories in this room. He always carried on heartily, wearing his enormous heart on his long draped sleeve, and sometimes also a pin on his lapel, "Brian saves." When he didn't show up one day late last semester, I emailed him, "Dear Brian, you always wanted to address him that formally. I send you well wishes. The coffee is cold. The tales are few. It seems like the end of an era. And it'll be a long time before I stop expecting him to come fill his mug with us again and maybe even start climbing the wall, once more showing us how things should be done. I'm so sorry he's missing out on this gathering of a community that really he is united here. What can we do but continue to tell the tales? I picture Brian's personal heaven, where the coffee is warm, the tales are many, and the choir is Welsh. Dear Brian, we'll miss you. Maggie?
I wish to register a complaint. My friend with the beautiful plumage is gone. He has ceased to be. When we first heard that Brian was gone, of course, we shared our memories, in person, online. I think almost every teacher involved in those conversations reflected on how, early in our Vanier careers, Brian took time to reach out, to make us feel welcome and supported. He was never condescending. He never pulled rank. In fact, More often than not, his mentoring took the form of him coming to us for help. Take a look at this email I received from a student. What do I do with this? I'm thinking of changing up this assignment. What do you think? Brian made us feel as if we fit in, like we were peers and colleagues right from the start. But for me, that mentorship began long before I arrived here as a teacher. When I was about the age of our students, I had a family crisis that resulted in my leaving school and leaving home. I went back to school a couple of years later, full of anxiety, trepidation, self-doubt. My very first class was a Content English course taught by a rakish, energetic wild man with a ridiculously long name. That course was many, many years ago, but moments of it stay with me. When we read Ambrose Bierce's short story, Coup de Grâce, for instance, Brian asked us why we thought the author used French for the title. I suggested that perhaps the choice reflected a certain level of culture that contrasted with the terrible circumstances of the Civil War in which the story takes place. Brian, as you might expect, leapt on this response and he agreed wholeheartedly, but did feel compelled to point out that while French was cultured, it came second, of course, to Welsh. Thanks to Brian, I fell in love with learning, with literature, and with teaching. When I returned here a decade ago as a teacher, I was amazed and touched that Brian remembered me, because I remembered him. Like so many of my colleagues, I was taken under that expansive wing. Somehow, Brian had a way of making you feel like you were his special protege. He was, as the cliche goes, larger than life, and he enlarged our lives. Thanks to Brian, I have danced at the St. David's Ball. I have marched in the St. Patrick's Day Parade. I've heard my husband sing at Carnegie Hall as part of the Welsh Male Choir, a choir to which I am sure Brian tried to recruit every man in this room. After all, it didn't matter if you could sing or if you weren't Welsh. It seems a little untoward to talk about myself when I'm here to honor him, but I suspect that, like most of you, I am who I am today because of him. When I was his student, he made me believe in myself again. He restored my faith in education and my spot within it. When I was his colleague, he made me feel like a peer. He befriended me. He gave and sought counsel. Joanne. Excusez-moi. I know you didn't want us to say anything. Mais chère Joanne, tu es aussi une amie précieuse, et je serai là pour toi. Tu n'as qu'à t'appeler. L'amour entre vous deux n'est pas mort avec lui, mais te soutiendra toujours. I cannot believe that Brian will not come sweeping into my office anymore with his billowing robes and remarkable ties. I cannot believe that we no longer run the risk of being mowed down by a wild man on a scooter. I cannot believe that my colleague, my mentor, and my friend is gone. He is not pining for the fjords. He's passed on. But I believe, like my Norwegian blue friend, Brian will be with us forever. I know that I am better for having known him, and I am grateful for his influence and his friendship. Death shall have no dominion, dear Brian. Thank you.
I'm just going to share 4 memories I have of the very, very many that stand out in my life, knowing Brian. A long time ago, when he first came to work, he was teaching a continuing education, and I had my office door open in the end building and was working, and suddenly this new teacher whisked by and put his head in the door and said, "I need a place to store my books and this suitcase I'm pushing along. Would it be okay if I use this space?" I said, "Most certainly, you're very, very welcome to do so." And so from that time on, whenever he needed a place to put his things, he came to N554. And so I got to connect with him. And of course, I found him to be an extremely talented, witty, entertaining, gracious, and lovable person. Fast forward, once I asked him if he would like to be the department chair, because I would like to nominate him for that position. But he said, sadly, he had to decline, and that was that. I don't know why, but he, I'm sure, would have made a wonderful chairperson too. And then another time we had a Remembrance Day ceremony in the auditorium, and I and Brian were asked to read some poetry. I only remember what he read. It was an amazing poem by Wilfred Owen, and of course with his dramatic flair for rhetoric and recitation, he really made that ceremony come alive, and it sticks out in my mind even today. And after that, I asked him, and subsequently on other occasions too, to make a tape or a CD of poetry readings. And I asked him many times, and somehow his busy life, I guess, interfered, and he never did get around to doing that. And that brings me to the last point, which was actually the last conversation we had in the print shop at the end of last semester. I was there doing some work, and he came in and we started talking, and I said, Brian, please make that tape or make a CD. We would just love to have that and to play it in our classrooms, start with Beowulf and right up to the present time. I had no idea that he was not well. He looked fantastic to me. And he just twinkled with his eye and said, maybe. And that was that. That was my last conversation with him. And this year, for some reason, I got 2 Christmas cards. We always exchange Christmas cards over the years. But this year, he sent one to my home as well as to my mailbox at Vanier. And I was really terribly grieved when I got the news. But the good thing is that he will live on forever in our hearts and in our memories as a fantastic person, and therefore I rejoice.
Eric Durley?
It means a lot to me to say a few words about Brian, because I know that it was important to him to wish Godspeed to colleagues in the department as they left us. In fact, he indicated to me recently that he saw this as part of his role as a senior member of the department. And it's upon this role that Brian played in our department that I'd like to elaborate today. I do not have a specific first memory of Brian. Now, given his flamboyant personality, it might seem strange to some of you, but you should understand that when I began at Vanier, the department was filled with colorful personalities. Now, it still is, but the difference being that at that time, a lot of these people had been at the college since its beginning. There was the famous St. Croix-Snowden rivalry. So it was a different department at that time. And it was in this environment that I perceived Brian as a junior colleague to some others. And though he appeared to have staked out his territory in the department, he still seemed to have his work cut out for him to make his voice heard among certain other outspoken colleagues, some of whom are still here today. However, Brian invariably rose to the occasion. Brian's geographical territory in the department became easily recognizable. He would come early to department meetings to occupy his space at the end of the boardroom table facing the chairperson. His reasons for doing so seemed practical, for this was a spot that would give him the largest surface area upon which to place what could seem to some to be half of the contents of his office. They obviously had never seen Brian's office. Brian was not one to furtively correct reading quizzes or essays during meetings. Instead, he would organize impressive piles of student journals, coating each one with stickers and labels. However, to demonstrate that he was fully engaged in the business of our meeting and that he took that business very seriously, Brian would take great care to voice his opinion on most, if not all, of the items on the agenda. It was the sincerity with which Brian discussed pedagogical issues that made it possible to disagree with him while still having a pleasant conversation. In fact, Brian was probably one of the greatest proponents of pleasant conversation at the college. He, by his own admission, had a great sense of community. The memory of Brian that I hope will endure for me is that of the sense of humor that he was always so eager to share with others. I believe that he thought it was part of his role in our department to inject a bit of humor into our lives, and I knew that I could always count on him for a laugh. Such was his ability to do so that I'm quite certain that he will still be able to bring a smile to my face for years to come when I think of meeting him in the corridors of the college with his cheerful, determined gait. It was a pleasure having Brian as a colleague.
My name is Erin McLeod. Some of you may know that I teach Caribbean literature, and some of you may know that Brian, from the first semester that I taught Caribbean literature over 10 years ago, would come into my class when we were teaching the book Annie John by Jamaica Kincaid and Growing Up Stupid Under the Union Jack by Austin Clarke to create a role play of a colonial classroom. I would start out making sure that the students were dutifully women on one side, or girls on one side, boys on the other, and that they had sung the British national anthem at least twice with me yelling at them during that time, before he would come and burst through the door as the headmaster. He would then go on to chastise student after student for wearing hats, for laughing, for not taking things seriously. It was sort of after 5-10 minutes that the students realized this guy was not joking around. So what he would then do is he would recite a number of poems. And one of the poems that he would always recite is a poem by Newbold called Vitae Lampada. Now, this is a very famous poem. It's a very famous poem that actually is kind of a celebration of colonialism, which in a course where we were attempting to talk about the creation of the post-colonial subject and all of these writers who wrote against colonialism, it was kind of an awkward poem to have him read in the hugest amount of emotion that a man could muster. With a stick in his hand, smashing the table about 3 inches away from students' faces. So, after reading this poem, though, what Brian would do would speak to the students about what poems are for. That yes, a poem like Vitae Lampada can be something that encourages people to believe in certain things. But the interesting thing about poetry, and this is the interesting thing about writing, and especially post-colonial poetry, Caribbean poetry, is that we can take what people write, and this is what post-colonial scholars and writers and thinkers tell us, is that we can take what people have written and we can change the meaning by seeing ourselves in the poetry. In this poem that I'm going to read, you have a schoolboy who is perhaps a future soldier for the empire who learns selfless commitment to duty in cricket matches. Now, for Brian, though, he explained this as more of learning selfless commitment to what we see as perhaps our own duties. That we, beyond what might be expected, can become things that we want to be because we have that huge level of commitment. So I'm going to read this poem in all of its colonial language because for me it becomes a message about that commitment, that sense of duty that Brian really had to teaching, to us as colleagues, and especially to the students, not to mention the commitment to the role as headmaster in my class, but a message that, of course, can only be sent through a discussion of cricket. There's a breathless hush in the close tonight, 10 to make and the match to win. A bumping pitch and a blinding light, an hour to play and the last man in. And it's not for the sake of a ribbon coat or the selfish hope of a season's fame, but his captain's hand on the shoulder smote. Play up, and play the game. The sand of the desert is sodden red, red with the wreck of a square that broke. The Gatlings jammed and the colonel dead, and the regiment blind with dust and smoke. The river of death has brimmed its banks, and England's far, and honor a name, but the voice of a schoolboy rallies the ranks. Play up, and play the game. This is the word that year by year, while in her place the school is set, every one of her sons must hear, and none that hears it dare forget. This they all, with a joyful mind, bear through life like a torch in flame, and falling fling to the host behind. Play up, and play the game. I don't know how I'm going to teach those texts this semester, but I'm going to try.
I thought I would just talk about a few of the things that I loved about Brian. The first thing I loved about Brian is his generosity. When I started, there was a handful of us that started at the same time. It was Ron Curtis, Mary O.B., Patty, myself, Andrea. We came in about 96, just after the reforms. And everyone in the department had 25 years seniority and up. And Brian, being sort of the novice, the more novice teacher, he kind of took us all under his wing. And I remember spending a lot of time over at the TP. Some of you retirees will remember the TP across the street, and sharing a beer. And he helped me a lot. At that time, beginning of my career, I was struggling with class discipline, what they don't teach you in grad school. And of course, Brian had lots of advice about that. And he got me through the doubts that I think we all have in those early years when you're wondering, gee, do I really want to do this as a career? So he was generous in that way. He was also generous materially. I happened to mention that I was thinking about doing home brewing. And he said, oh, I've got an old kit and I never use it. And he gave it to me. And then I remember at that time we used to do department retreats up at Far Hills Inn, and we did some cross-country skiing. And after one of those, on rented skis, I mentioned that, yeah, I think I might like to take up cross-country skiing. Well, Brian was trading up, so he gave me his old equipment, his old boots and his old skis. And then I happened to mention, I'm thinking about trying to I hadn't golfed since my teen years. Well, you can guess what happened. One morning in my office, there's a golf bag with golf clubs in it that he had found at some garage sale. And it wasn't just that he'd given me the clubs, but that he'd been thinking of me on the weekend. So he's extremely generous in that way, and I'm sure he was generous with his students as well. I had the office next to him, and I would overhear his consultations with his students, and he was always probing, engaging, always the Socratic method, never giving them anything, always, asking from them. Anthony's nodding, he's overheard those consultations too, long consultations. Another thing I loved about Brian was his eccentricity, which we all know, we've all witnessed. The robe, the scooter, the parrot. For years, he had a mannequin head somehow propped above his office door. I don't know what that was about. Eccentricity is really just the allowance that you give yourself to be 100% the person that you are. And Brian had that in spades, without any concern for, you know, the boundaries of normalcy or what's conventional. I loved that he was opinionated and never shy to express his opinion in department meetings. He would often inject an original idea into a discussion at a department meeting and shape or frame the discussion. He was also very opinionated with his students and forthright with them. You know, in a time now when, as teachers, we're asked not to use red pen because it's deemed too aggressive. Brian not only used red pen, but he would write rubbish on the student's paper if he knew that the student was BSing. And you know, I'm sure the students came to appreciate that honesty. Maybe not immediately, but came to appreciate it. The last thing I'd like to say that I loved about Brian was that he had this strong sense of community, that he was so engaging, you know, whether if it's with a joke or if he'd meet you in the print shop. He absolutely loved people just stopping in at his office and chatting with him, or he'd pop over to my office and talk about, you know, a rugby try that he'd done over the weekend or something that had happened. And yeah, I mean, sometimes he would overstay his welcome and I'd have to say, you know, I really must get on. But that was Brian's blessing, and that, I think, was a kind of a gift that he offered to us. You know, there used to be a time, not that long ago, when you go down into the lunchroom to the staff cafeteria and there'd be about a dozen people seated around the table. And I saw Pat Tedford coming in. You'll remember the lunches we had, and we'd just sit around and literally break bread together and talk, sometimes pedagogy, sometimes not. And something has happened in the last 10 years or so, and I know that room has become part-time a classroom, but there seems to be an erosion of that sense of community and that social aspect. I think Brian will have many legacies, but I hope that one of his legacies is that we will somehow manage to foster again that sense of spirit, that sense of solidarity, and a sense of community that he prized so much, especially in this day when so much of our social life is online. Brian reminds us that the relationships, the face-to-face relationships we have right here also have meaning and have value. And I hope that that continues. Thank you.
I'm going to read because I don't think I can do this spontaneously. I have the privilege of not only sharing my own thoughts, but also Mary Opie's. Having lost her father last week, she had wanted to be here, but felt that it was too much. So she asked that we share what she had written in 2006 for a Vanier newsletter upon the 10th anniversary of her becoming a teacher. My colleagues embraced me with a warmth that I did not expect in such a large institution. I was literally the new kid on the block, a rookie amid a whole lot of knowledgeable veterans, eager to do my mentors proud. One of my most vivid memories plays in my head just like that scene from Le Fabuleux Destin d'Amélie Poulain, where Amélie guides the blind man down the street to the metro, describing everything in detail as they walk briskly past. Picture the college, first week of classes, students wandering around aimlessly, shocking. The entire first floor of the A wing packed with students lined up for the basement bookstore. And then picture one energetic Welsh chap from the English department guiding me through the hallways of low ceilings as hundreds of books for sale notices rustled in our wake, pointing out mailboxes, internal, external mail, offices, introducing me to the print shop staff and any faculty member that happened to be around, explaining how things work, where things are, and what not to eat. This description, she said when she emailed Stephen and asked him if one of us could share this, she said, is but a brief testament to Brian's incredible generosity and collegiality. He was such a huge part of our community. I had the fortune of being Brian's neighbor. I used to be an N building dweller, and in my last full year of teaching, I became an A building dweller, and was blessed to have Brian 2 doors down. One memory I have is of him coming in, and because he knew that I taught Tolkien, sharing with me how much he loved Tolkien. And a favorite enduring image I have of Brian comes from a moment in his history that I never witnessed, but which he described to me so vividly that it took life in my mind, and it will continue to endure. Picture a young Brian racing around the English countryside on a motorcycle, sporting a helmet that he had painted himself with Tolkien imagery. In honor of Brian, I would like to read an excerpt from Tolkien's The Silmarillion, which begins with a creation myth. The creator, Iluvatar, invites his angelic creatures called Ainur to join with him in the creation of the world through elaborating on musical themes. The Ainur do so, but, writes Tolkien, each comprehended only that part of the mind of Iluvatar from which he came. Then the voices of the Ainur, like unto harps and lutes and pipes and trumpets and viols and organs, and like unto countless choirs singing with words, began to fashion the theme of Iluvatar to a great music, and a sound arose of endless interchanging melodies woven in harmony. And the music and the echo of the music went out into the void, and it was not void. Never since have the Ainur made any music like to this music, though it has been said that a greater still shall be made before Iluvatar by the choirs of the Ainur and the children of Iluvatar after the end of days. Then the themes of Iluvatar shall be played aright, and take being in the moment of their utterance. For all shall then understand fully his intent in their part, and each shall know the comprehension of each, and Iluvatar shall give to their thoughts the secret fire, being well pleased. There's so many things I love about this passage, but what most brings Brian to mind is the depiction of music as a creative force, and also the idea that each Ainur is unique and reveals an aspect of Iluvatar that no other creature could reveal, but which is comprehended by the others once it is shared by that Ainur. Brian loved the creative force of music, and he loved to share it with us. He also loved to share his understanding and unique appreciation of life. Through him, we have all enjoyed a perspective of the world that was uniquely Brian's to share as a child of Iluvatar, who will be sorely missed.
Whenever I teach White Tiger, I actually teach a quote that is incorrect, but somehow, oddly enough, fit in that it in no way applies to Brian. So the quote is, "Most men lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still within them." And I got thinking about this because, unfortunately, as time has gone on, I got thinking, there's a little bit of truth to that, unfortunately. Many of us, we kind of settle, or we don't quite accomplish everything that we want. And then there's Brian, who really, in many ways, what people have said, I'm just going to say what so many other people have said, he was larger than life. He was a man that in any number of ways song burst forth from him, whether it was just hearing his beautiful voice in the hallway, or hearing about the choirs that he was in, or seeing him, perhaps one of my very first and very treasured memories of Brian was watching him just fly from the N building down to the D with his robes flowing in the wind. But most importantly, Brian looked as if he was competing against somebody very important, and he was going to win. And that was the best. I mean, just something as small as going from the N building to the D building, which most of us do regularly, although albeit rather normally. There was Brian sucking the marrow out of that moment. And I cherished him for that. honestly, our hallway will never be the same because we've missed this awesome Welshman who literally would stop in to our offices, would chat with us, sometimes, as was mentioned, for quite a long period of time, even though we had class, Brian. And yet these were the things that really brought our hallway to life and that helped make our department so special. But I want to talk about something that Brian did for me in particular. I had taught, before starting at Vanier, I had taught 7th grade, which I can assure you is quite a bit different from Cégep. And I had never gone to Cégep, I had just gone to university. So I said, well, 7th grade teaching, not going to really work for Cégep level, but hey, I've gone to university, I've got it covered. So I walk into the classroom, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm good to go, I've had teaching experience, we're cool. And I, hand out worksheets, and I'm thinking, man, this is going to be brilliant. We are going to have some killer discussions on poetry, and these kids are going to eat this up, right? And I was, I'm gung-ho, and then lo and behold, for some crazy reason, the students wanted to talk about, like, The Bachelor, or what they were going to do that weekend. I mean, certainly not all of them. Some of them were, like, gung-ho, but, for some reason, some students actually weren't psyched about being in English class, which was shocking to me. So I had to reinvent the wheel, which kind of annoyed me. Hadn't I put in my time before? Shouldn't I just walk into this classroom and know exactly how to teach? But that did not happen. Enter Brian. And Brian, really, after seeing him fly between N and D, I thought, that guy is my kind of crazy. I gotta know that guy. So, but as it turned out, I didn't have to get to know Brian. Brian was more than happy to get to know any number of us, right? That was his great gift. So Brian really kind of helped me. He sort of took me under his wing. Even though I'd had some teaching experience, he took me step by step by step. Whether it was something as simple as, his belief, take attendance. Yes, I do notice that you're here. Yes, I do notice if you're not here. And this is the thing that I most owe Brian. See, Brian really had the high standards, I think, for everybody around him, really, but definitely for his students. And I remember he would say to me, something, if a student is misbehaving in my class, I will call them into my office and I will say, you are directly affecting the dynamic of this class, and that's not okay. And I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. Like, he wasn't doing it to belittle. He wasn't doing it to embarrass. I believe, honestly, what Brian was trying to say was, you are capable, and you're smart, and you have something to offer. And I expect when you're in my class, you're going to bring your A game because you're capable of it. And sometimes, just hearing somebody's passion and enthusiasm just is a game changer, right? So I noticed after that automatically I went into my classes with a greater confidence, with an attitude of, yes, when you're in my class, we aren't talking about The Bachelor, let me tell you. We're talking about the literature. And it's really a direct result of Brian. And sometimes you don't even need to say word one. It's simply your presence that changes everything. And really, that's due to Brian's guidance, his passion, his love of teaching, I believe his love of students. So, Brian, this is what I want to tell you. You are so sorely missed. You can't even begin to know. And look at all of these people standing, because there's no more seats. You are so loved. You are so missed. And our hallway, our department is never going to be the same. And you're going to hear story after story has been told. But I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart because you let me become the teacher I wanted to become. You let me teach in the way that I believe has true meaning, and I give you direct credit for that. Thank you.
Looking around, I started to realize this is like the Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. It's really warming to see so many people from the glorious past when giants walked the earth like Brian. Yeah, he was our genus loci. He was our puck. He was our big Welsh imp. I'd like to talk about him outside of the context of school, although he wasn't that different. How much he valued, some people have mentioned this, physical courage and competition. Very competitive guy. As you may or may not know, when he was 40, he took up rugby even more bravely with the old boys here. I noticed that Guy Quinn has left. These were real battles, which he attacked with all the gusto that he could bring to it. I always knew when there was a game had been played on the previous weekend, because often in the mailroom, I would see him walk in with, like, not just the red badge of courage, but the black and blue badge of courage. And the lip, right? He'd never bring it up, right? So I'd love to tease him about it. Right? Yeah. Had occasion to go golfing with he and his dear wife, and that was dramaturgy in action. It was just the most, in a very respectful way. Let me suggest how this took place. A normal game would take about 2 to 2.5 hours. With Brian, it was maybe 4 hours, which was just mostly delightful. But for someone who liked to master things, to try to master golf is impossible. But he would just bear down and work twice as hard, and we had to stand back and watch him. So this is totally respectful. So here's Brian. We always carried our bags and he could smoke. Spot the ball. Yeah, back when I met Brian for the first time, this is before we all became, guys, new age sensitive men. Our competitive edge was a lot more evident, a lot more on the surface. So I see him strolling down the hallway early in the semester with his gowns. And this is pre-Harry Potter, so okay. This should be interesting, right? I invite him in my office, and we're kind of looking, checking each other out the way guys do. Right? And he knows I have a surfing poster on my wall. Oh, you surf? I said, oh, yes. I do too. I said, oh, really? Where? He says, Cornwall. I said, that's not real surfing. So, okay, right? So, I rock climb. You rock climb? No. And I didn't know enough about it to fake it, so, chalk went up for Brian, right? He looks around my office and he says, as other people have mentioned, I could climb up that door frame and touch the ceiling. So, of course, I challenged him. He stands up and I notice he has, fingers like bratwurst. These huge, muscular hands. Right? Puts the grip on the door frame, right? Puts a foot up, scrambles up like a Spider-Man, touches the ceiling, hanging upside down. Piece of cake, Mike. So I knew this was going to be a lot of fun, and it and it was for the next 30 years.
It's good to hear these stories of Brian. Stephen really captured accurately what it was like to have Brian come into our office every day, and really every day that he taught. He would come in like a whirlwind, and often to discuss something that a student had said or written, or to read or share something. Sometimes it wasn't so much a discussion as a monologue, and we would sit there, but those were the best ones actually, because they were like private performances for us. Brian sharing his theories on education, Brian telling a story, reading from a poem, or from a novel. And whenever he spoke and whatever he spoke about, it was memorable. Plus he made the coffee, so that was really And so this office that Stephen and I share is really, in a sense, Brian's annex. And that's how we will always remember it. And it was there that Brian became, I would say, my mentor and my friend. And I just have two brief memories that I would like to share. The first time that I saw him and the last time that I met him and the last time that I saw him. Before I met him, I knew him only by reputation, eccentric reputation, which everyone has kind of talked about, you know, with the gown and on the scooter, and often in the photocopy center, always in the photocopy center. Really, I think he blew through his photocopy budget in the first week of school. And he would cut, but if you've ever seen one of his outlines, they were works of art. He would cut out pictures, and he would ask me. One time he borrowed my camera because he wanted to go to the Museum of Fine Arts, and there was a display on it. He wanted to take photos of some of the paintings so that he could put them in his outline. But the first time that I met him, and I knew also, just from having seen him, that he was well-liked, well-known and well-liked. The first time that I met him was upstairs when I got my office in A501, and we got to talking, and we discovered that we shared a love of detective stories. Now, when I say shared a love of detective stories, I had at the time maybe read 50 novels. He had probably read 500 easily, which meant that every time he asked me if I'd heard of a novelist, most of the time I was like, no, I haven't. And then he would always say the same thing, oh, you have to read him or her. This story is a cracker. And that meant it was good. It was a cracker. And so that first meeting, he asked me about an author by the name of Alexander McCall Smith, who wrote a first book called the #1 Ladies Detective Agency, and became a series featuring this female detective in Botswana. I hadn't heard of the series. He had, and he encouraged me to go out and find a copy and read it. That was the first day I met him. The next day I came into my office, the next day, not the next week, and on my desk was this book. And he had gone out. He hadn't gotten it from his office. I don't know if he could have found it in his office, to be honest with you. But he had gone out and purchased it at a secondhand bookstore, a really nice copy. And inside, there was a note welcoming me to A501 and to the English department. And I will always remember that, because that was vintage Brian, thoughtful, kind, and generous. That was my first memory of him, the first time I met him. The last time that I saw Brian was Christmas week. Often, over the years, we would sort of end up, 2 or 3 days before Christmas in our office marking papers. One time he took me out for dinner a few years ago. This year, I saw him on the 21st and 22nd. And on the 22nd, we were both busy marking papers, and we talked a little bit about the holidays and about Christmas cards. But on the 21st, or the Christmas rather, but on the 21st, I saw him working on those Christmas cards, the thing that most of you here have received at one time or another. I think if he knew your name, if he'd seen you around, if he'd had one conversation with you, you've received a Christmas card. I didn't realize how many he sent out. I truly didn't until that day on the 21st, he asked me to help him. And he always said, are you busy? Not busy. Oh, well then do you mind helping me? So that's how he got me into subbing sometimes for him. But, so he asked me if I would stamp the cards. There was a story even for that, why he used a stamp. Because one time, a friend of his had changed addresses, continued to send him cards, and never told him his return address. And so Brian would stamp, you all receive that. And as I stamped them, I realized how many he sent out. And when I asked him about it, his simple reply was just, well, it's the thing to do, isn't it? And I think it is. And I hope that Brian's memory will spur us on as a community to acts of kindness and generosity and collegiality. And I'd just like to end with this. One of the authors that we both really liked was Dorothy Sayers, who wrote a series of detective stories. One of the novels is called Clouds of Witness. It's actually a reference to a verse from Hebrews which talks about being surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And Joanne, if I can just speak to you and say that I hope that you can take some comfort today in seeing, I think, a great cloud of witnesses, all testifying really to the impact that Brian had on us individually and as a community. And we'll never forget him. And I just say, may you rest in peace.
Thank you to everyone who's spoken and everyone who's worked on putting this together. I know that some of you have to go. It's the end of universal break. We have, Kevin has kindly arranged for a bagpiper to come and play. He'll play now, and it'll give you a chance to gather your thoughts. I'm sure there are many of you who, I imagine there are some of you who would like to speak. So please, we'll leave the mic open. If you'd like to speak, either come up or signal Anthony or me. And depending on how many people want to speak, the reception will start afterwards. There's some food out there. There's also the memory sheets that you can drop into internal mail. Those are the colored sheets on the table in the back, and the guest book. So our bagpiper is Sasha Matthew. If anyone would like to speak, please feel welcome.
I have one short little anecdote. I'm Christopher Smith. I teach music. I teach a composition class where we deal with lyrics. I spent a whole lot of lunches with Brian, hearing him talk about his philosophy and how he does things. And I was complaining once when we were doing a lyric writing with the students in composition class, how none of the students seemed to understand anything, any of the basics about poetry. Nothing about feet or rhyme or masculine or feminine or anything like that. And he says, well, I'd be perfectly happy to come and speak to your class about it if you like. I said, great. This was early on when I just first started teaching here. So we fixed a time, and I told the students, Brian Llewellyn from the English department is going to come and talk to us about poetry today. And so sure enough, a rap comes at the door. I open up the door,
and he strides in with his robe. He didn't usually wear a mortarboard, but he was that day. He strode in, stood at the front of the class, opened up a book, and started declaiming some epic Welsh poem, which I can't remember what it was, but it took about 10 minutes with considerable thunder and lightning attached. And then at the end of it, he slammed the book shut, and in the sun coming in through the window, a little bit of puff of dust came up. And he said, "Thank you." And then he strode out, not even breaking step to shake my hand on the way out. And that was the door closed behind him. And so one of the students said, "What was that?" To tell you the truth, I was a little mystified myself. So I remember Brian speaking about how he would teach this stuff, and I said, "Well, what did you think?" And one shaggy guy in the back who never spoke up in class, who usually just sat there with his unkempt hair and beard chewing his fingernails during class, spoke up for maybe the first time and said, "I thought it was awesome." So I jumped on that. "Please, go on." He said, "Well, it was a great story. It wasn't boring. It wasn't insipid. If I can write a song like that, I think I've won." Well, okay. I think that if Brian could reach this guy, then he must have been doing a lot of good in the college. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shirley Pettifer, sociology teacher. I've been working on strategic planning the last couple of years on gradual retirement. One of my favorite stories of Brian came from a student who, when she returned, she had been my student, and then when she returned in the fall, various domestic issues arose and she was without a home, and she ended up living with me for a short time. Well, she came home after her first class with Brian Llewellyn-ap-Dafydd with his course outline, and while we were having supper, she attempted to do the dramatic reading of the course outline that Brian had done in the class. My favorite part, and I literally fell off my chair laughing, my favorite part was when she got to the section about late submissions of assignments, and it was called "When the Train Done Left the Station." It was marvelous.
My name's Ian MacArthur. I taught in the physical education department here for quite a while, and got to know Brian quite well. He was very qualified in climbing, as and he was terrific as we organized our courses. He got quite involved with them. Took him cross-country skiing. He got into that, but the climbing was good. I have a story about the climbing, but I also played some rugby with him. We had lots of fun over the years. But I guess the climbing one time is everybody's talking about how you climb, and one of the things that novice climbers have a tendency to do if they want to climb a wall is they get right in like this. And we always say if you can get back, you can see what you can climb. And that was Brian's analogy. And he said, "Well, I wonder how we're going to get it across to the students." He says, "I'll try it." So we're having a lecture about proper techniques, staying away, being able to see these things. He says, your hands, he says to the students, your hands, you can feel, you can do things with it. But your feet, you have to be able to look so you can do that. He says, just think what happens when you're with your girlfriend, the lights go out, you're downstairs, you know where your hands want to go.
My name name's Eric Lemove. I teach in the history department here at Vanier College. History can be difficult to get through to our students sometimes. You're always trying to find that hook, that little bit that'll make it mean something, that thing that happened 1,000 years, why do I care, in 2016. Partway through my semester, I get to the year 1114, when the English conquered the Welsh. And I'm sorry to those of you with Welsh extraction in the room, the Welsh don't take up a lot more of my course than that moment. Sorry. But every year, I always stop and say, does anyone here have Brian Llewellyn as a teacher? And every semester, there's always one, but usually only one in the room, which is unfortunate. And then I follow it up with, has anyone here ever seen that fella in the hallway with the black robes? Oh, yes, everybody knows him, everybody knows him. And I say, well, he's Welsh, and if you want to know Wales, go take a class with him. And that would give the students at least a little something to hold on to for that little bit of knowledge from history. And after that lecture, every single semester I went up to Brian and I said, Brian, I taught them about Wales today. Now they know all about it, kind of thing. And he was always happy. And now I realized that that's going to get a lot harder. Because by next year, very, very, very few people will remember, and after that, even fewer. But I will always bring it up, and I will always bring him up, so that he'll never be forgotten. Thank you.
How many stories? My name is Tom Peters. I taught in the physical education department for about 20 years here as part of my teaching career. And with Brian coming to the outdoor program to share his teaching ability and his, I'll just tell a couple stories about his approach with students. First, totally respected by the students in his ability to tell stories from memory, poetry. And this was just unique to be sitting around a campfire and hearing that type of talent. So one such course, probably soaking wet and cold, finally getting inside to warm up. Very, very cold night, I remember. So Brian goes to start his car and park it outside the outdoor center door, comes up to say goodbye, and the students pull him in. One more story, Brian, please. One more story. And the car's warming up. And Brian, of course, engages and gets totally lost in his story. It goes into through many chapters. And of course, the end of this story results in, goodbye, Brian. And we see him a couple of minutes later, the car's out of gas. Yeah. And the other that was really unique in learning from colleagues was, I think in the fact that he was assisting on a course just out of generosity and obviously interest and love of the outdoors, was that he got a chance to just help in the teaching process without having to handle all of it. It was a license. And I remember pulling a student aside, and I've used this so many times in my own teaching career with students individually, and he just approached a student who was showing some display of character that really wasn't helpful, as people have seen, and in the situation. And he took the person aside, and in all respect, he said, you know, inside of ourselves, we all think of ourselves as good people. It's how you express that to others that really counts. And that I used so many times, and it was just a direct switch to somebody's own self-respect. And loved you, buddy. Camp well.
Sorry, just a very quick story. Sorry, I also have to teach you this. Just want to tell you about the day Brian borrowed my shirt. It actually happened, it was close, I think it was after the final English department meeting of the term, and Brian had some sort of concert probably to go to, and after the meeting was over, I just saw him running in the hallways, and over the years, Brian and I often kind of talked about fashion. We both have amazing fashion sense. And he actually often tried to convert me to bow ties, but I just always told him that I wasn't quite at that level yet. But this time, I guess I was the only one around wearing a suit. And he's like, "Can I borrow your shirt, mate?" and I was wearing just the shirt and the blazer. But it was Friday afternoon, and so it's like, I have a show, and I forgot my shirt. And of course, as you remember, Brian and I are basically the same kind of size. So out there in front of the print shop, naturally, we basically took everything off, and I gave him my shirt, and I was left with the tie. I didn't put the tie back on. The blazer, and he tried to button. He actually popped the button, but these were done, so the rest was kind of like, and he put something on top of that, I always assumed. And he went to, he's like, "Lifesaver." That Christmas, I got a special card, and I still have it in my office. It says, "This was just for you, thanks for the shirt." Many other memories, but goddamn, it'll be hard to replace me.